I am pleased to introduce two gifted educators at Orono Schools, Dr. Christine Flesher, our Superintendent of Schools, and also Mr. Adam Lamparske, our Orono Schumann Elementary Principal. First, we'll begin with a welcome from Dr. Flesher.
Thank you, Lisa. Welcome, everyone. A big thank you to everyone here today to learn about our kindergarten program. As Lisa said, my name is Christy Flesher, and I am honored to serve as superintendent of Orono Schools. I have been with Orono Schools since the early 90s, so this is my 28th year working in the district and 30 years in public education. Before beginning my role as superintendent, I was the director of special services for 17 years, and previous to that, for 10 years as a school psychologist in the district. I'm also a parent, a Spartan parent of two young Spartans in 5th and 7th grade. And it feels like just yesterday that I was also at learning about kindergarten in Orono Schools. And it's just been wonderful. To let you know a little bit about our district, relationships, character, and collaboration are hallmarks of Orono Schools. We work together every day to make sure our learners feel that sense of belonging and connectedness that we know helps them develop confidence and a love for learning. It's what we want for every single child in Orono Schools. And much of that credit goes to Principal Adam Lamparske for developing an environment that's caring and inclusive in his building. You can just feel it. I know he's eager to get started, so I'm going to stop talking and just turn over the presentation to Adam and wish you all a very good day. Thank you. Mr. Lamparske.
Thank you very much, Dr. Flesher, and welcome everyone. I'm just happy that you're joining us today. The purpose of this presentation really is just to give you some detailed information about our kindergarten program. It's also an opportunity for me to brag about our school, which I take every opportunity to do. I'm really proud of what we do here. And so we're going to give you some detailed information about our program so that you can begin to really envision what that will look like for your child, because that is going to come sooner than you think. In fact, your children will start kindergarten 266 days from today. So those will go by quickly. And we know that kindergarten is such a critical year in the lives of children, and also the source of such excitement and nervousness from children and parents. And so we're hoping that the information today can help with, again, just give you an idea of what to expect and what kindergarten looks like here at Schumann. So as Dr. Flesher said, I am Adam Lamparske. I'm the very proud principal of what I think is the best elementary school in the world. I challenge you to find a better one. I am thrilled to brag to you today about our school and specifically about kindergarten at Schumann Elementary. A little about me too. I've been the principal here at Schumann for 8 years now. And like Dr. Flesher, I have children in our district. I have a 7th grader at the middle school and a 3rd grader at the intermediate school, both former Orono kindergartners. So we are on this parent journey in Orono together as well. So in Orono, again, I just want to talk about how thankful I am that you're all here today. But in Orono, one of the things that we truly value is the relationship between the school and your family. We really see this as an exciting challenge of educating your children, and as something that is done in partnership for you. We want you here. We want you to be a part of the school. We want to have conversations with you. You know your child better than anyone else in the world. So we know that in order to give them the best educational experience, we need to work together, and we honor and value that. So there are, of course, many things that make kindergarten in Orono a wonderful experience for our children, but there are some really concrete things that we feel set us apart from other schools. I could go on and on and on, but you'll see on this slide a few of those things. Some of you may not know that the structure of our school is a little bit different than most elementary schools. So my school, Schumann Elementary, only serves kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade students. we don't know of any local districts that do anything similar, and we think it's a really fortuitous structure. We're able to really focus in on the learning needs of those young learners. So we have our intermediate school, which is grades 3-5, but at Schumann Elementary, we are just K2, which we think is really great. We do have small class sizes. Everyone always wants to know about class sizes. In kindergarten, you're going to see 20 to 21 kids per class. That tends to be a handful less than our districts that are nearby. We really try to cultivate a culture where every child is known, where kids feel safe, where they know that this is their place. I challenge myself every year to know everybody's name. I think I'm doing pretty well. I don't know that I get 100% of our 566 kids down, but every day I work to know more and more of them. And again, similar to just making sure that we have an environment that feels safe and inclusive, we do place an emphasis on teacher and peer relationships. We know that when kids have strong relationships with their teacher and with those around them, that it makes that school experience that much richer. Of course, in Orono, you're getting outstanding academics. We have a reputation for that, but also a focus on social and emotional growth is really important in our early grades. And we do that through our character education program primarily, and that'll be something that I speak to a little bit later in the presentation. So I love this picture. Our milk cartons are not that large at lunch, just for the record. But I do want to acknowledge that some of the things, and I remember this as a parent, some of the things that make us the most nervous about sending our child to school for the first time are some of those simplest things. How are they going to know how to get to their classroom? Will they eat their lunch? What do they do if they have to go to the bathroom? What if they can't put their own coat on? And I want to assure you that we assist children every day with all of these things. And these are all things that every kindergartner needs help with at some point. And when we help them, of course, just as we do in academics, we help them in a way that allows them to gradually build the independence in these things. Knowing that, again, just like in academics, if we do the work for them, then it's going to hinder that independence. So these are things, again, that are part of kindergarten. They're things that we do and help kids with every day, and things that you can know that we're taking care of for you when your kids are here at Schumann Elementary. So we'll take a look at kindergarten readiness a bit. It's interesting. Most of the research has identified some indicators for kindergarten readiness, and the reason I show you this slide is to help you sort of breathe a sigh of relief. I think when people think about what it means to be ready for kindergarten, they think of a whole host of academic indicators. And if you'll look at what the research tells us, here you'll notice that only one of these, basic number and letter recognition, is an academic indicator. I think there's a misconception that students at Orono are coming into kindergarten reading at the 8th grade level and doing trigonometry, when in fact, most of our kindergarten students are entering kindergarten as non-readers, and that's developmentally appropriate. Now they're leaving kindergarten as readers, but it is certainly developmentally appropriate to not know how to read entirely when you're entering kindergarten. So we look at these, they mostly fall under sort of that social emotional realm. And again, I don't want you to look at this slide and start worrying about whether or not your child is going to be ready, because these are things that we work on in kindergarten all day long. But some of these things are enthusiasm for learning. So is your child excited about being at school and wanting to learn new things? And it's important to note that these are, indicators that have a developmental component to it, meaning, do they have solid oral language skills for a 5-year-old, right? We're looking at what's age appropriate. The ability to listen and follow directions, certainly something that we want to develop for kindergarten. A desire to be independent. There are 19, 20 other students in the classroom, and the teacher can't be sitting with just one student all day long, of course. We do certainly have small group and independent work or one-on-one work with paras and teachers, but there are times when students will need to work independently. The ability to play with others, moving from that parallel play where you're sort of playing with somebody by happenstance because you're next to them, to actually engaging others in play. Strong fine motor skills. And then of course, back to that basic number and letter recognition, which is helpful for kindergarten readiness. But the good news is that kids come to us in kindergarten at all different levels, with all different skills, with all different experiences, and we welcome them where we are. And I think one of the things that we're strongest at here at Schumann is differentiating our instruction to meet the individual learning needs of students. We look at where they are, what they need, and we tailor the instruction to meet those needs. We'll talk a little bit about that when we look at what academics look like in the classroom and how we meet those individual needs. So we can peek quickly at a typical schedule for kindergarten. Here is what a morning looks like at Schumann Elementary School. We have, of course, our check-in and attendance and all of those logistical things that have to happen in the morning. Our morning meeting, which is when we do a lot of our character work and check in with each other. And then on to, of course, you'll see a lot of reading and writing. Literacy is a big portion of the kindergarten day. Moving into everybody's favorite classes, recess and lunch. And then we look at the afternoon where we see some math along with social studies, science, and health. Our specials, which we'll talk about in a bit. We do have a snack that sort of offsets lunchtime, and that's something that you'll send in with your child, and they'll keep a kind of a bag of snacks in their locker. A little bit of a rest or downtime, and then a little more literacy as well. So one thing that most people note when they look at this schedule, as I kind of toggle back and forth between morning and afternoon, is it's pretty packed. We do a lot of work in kindergarten at Schumann Elementary School, but I want to assure you that we're not asking your children to do things, to do more than they can do. And what's not reflected in this schedule, of course, is the numerous movement breaks, extra recesses, songs, dances, all of those things that we do between these academic areas in the classroom. We know that students need those things in order to learn best. It's a fun environment. We are up and moving and playing and learning by doing. And so it's, I want you to rest assured that it's a fun and dynamic classroom. And some of those things aren't reflected on this schedule. We know that, and I don't know if this is scientifically substantiated, but sort of the rule of thumb is that students' attention span is about as many minutes long as years they are old. And so, at 5 and 6 years old, even in a reading lesson, we try to pivot or do something different every about 5 or 6 minutes. So that is our day. And let's look at some specific academic content here. So obviously, as I mentioned before, kindergarten is a really heavy literacy year. This is really where their reading journey begins. And so we focus on the 5 components of literacy. And I'll go through those really quickly. Phonemic awareness. This is sort of that basic building block of language and reading. Phonemic awareness, the way that it's been described to me that I think is most clear, is that it can be done with your eyes closed. It's really about phonemes, about sounds, about individual words being made up of sounds. And so one of the ways that we assess this in students, a simple explanation would be through either segmenting or blending. And so if I say the word cat, can you say k-at? Can you identify or segment those sounds? Or the opposite of that would be blending. If I say the word d-a-g, can you say dog? So you can blend those sounds together. So it's an understanding that words are made up of individual sounds. And then when we look at phonics, phonics is the understanding that those sounds that we just talked about have symbols that correspond to them called letters. And if we put those letters together, we can make words, and those words together can make sentences. And we do have a systematic phonics program called Sunday Essentials that students engage in every day. And then, of course, fluency, which is more than just reading rate, but it certainly includes that. It's about intonation and prosody and expression. Vocabulary, of course, understanding what words mean, and then ultimately the ultimate goal of reading is comprehension. Do you understand what it is that you're reading? And not only do you understand it, but can you analyze and synthesize it and think about it deeply? We want kids to have, of course, a literal understanding or comprehension of what they read, but also an inferential understanding. So should they be able to recall what color the boy's hat was? Sure. And that tells us that they have a literal understanding. But we also want to dig deeper and ask kids questions about why did you think a character made the decision that they made? And really dig into that deeper inferential comprehension. So how do we teach literacy in kindergarten at Schumann Elementary School? Well, it's a mix of whole group, small group, and independent instruction. So I mentioned the phonics program that tends to sit outside in some ways of our readers workshop is what we call it. So the readers workshop, the structure of the readers workshop is really in order to allow for that differentiation that I alluded to previously. So we generally will start our literacy block with an interactive read aloud to the whole group. And that interactive read aloud might focus on a specific skill or strategy that the whole class will be focusing on. And then we move into independent and small group work. So students working independently, either listening to reading, partner reading, doing some word work, some follow-up to phonics, and writing about reading, while the teacher is working with small groups. And each of these components is based on the need that day of that individual student. So nobody or very few people would be doing the same thing. So at independent reading, you'd be reading a book at your instructional level or at your independent level, at that point. And so that's how we go about differentiating, is using this workshop model within our literacy block. We look at writing, things that we teach writing, starting out right in kindergarten. So these ideas of generating topics of writing, applying concepts of print, the idea that we read right or left to right and up to down, and that words convey a message. Word choice, thinking about different words we can use to convey that message. Author's craft, so what sort of style and genre are you using? Strategies for spelling, of course, go into our writing, adding details and writing in different genres. And how we teach writing, again, we use a writer's workshop model. So there'll be a whole group or mini lesson that will teach an overall concept or introduce a genre. Then we have teacher modeling, independent writing, of course. We do some small group partner writing, conferencing individually with the teacher. And then, of course, the most important part of writing is sharing that writing to an audience. The most fun part, too, for the kids. Now, if we look at math and the things that we teach in math, starting right in kindergarten, numbers and numeration, essentially counting, operations and computation, simple math problems, data and probability, measurement, time and money, geometry, patterns, functions, and even algebra. Yes, algebra in kindergarten. So missing numbers, 2 plus what equals 3. That is algebra. And so we start to introduce those concepts. And then, of course, a balance of procedural math and conceptual understanding. We really do have a focus on conceptual understanding in our math. We know that it's important for students to understand what the math actually means. And we know that if they know what the math means, that they'll be able to apply it in new and novel situations. And that's, of course, what our ultimate goal is, for students to actually be able to apply the math that they know. It doesn't mean that we don't, or that we shy away from teaching kids how to do math in a procedural way, but the ultimate goal is for them to understand what the math means. A simple example would be understanding that 2 times 4 is actually 2 groups of 4, and being able to visualize that, as well as knowing that 2 times 4, just as a procedure, or memorizing that equals 8. So how do we teach math? We do, again, a lot of whole group and small group instruction along with individual practice. We do problem solving in everyday situations. We want to make sure that math is as relevant as possible. Practicing, of course, of basic skills. We don't ignore those. Our curriculum, we use the everyday math curriculum. It is a spiraling curriculum. And what that means is that we don't introduce a concept and then that concept goes away for the rest of the year. that we introduce a concept, and then a couple weeks later, we'll come back and touch on it and come back and touch on it. So the curriculum is constantly reinforcing the learning that the kids are doing. Again, we do use a workshop model with a lot of small group and independent work. And we do what are called daily math talks, where the teacher will put something up on our screen. It could be a picture, it could be a problem, and then students take turns explaining that in mathematical terms based on their understanding. So specials, our special classes, one of the highlights of our kindergartners' day. This is something that not every school does starting in kindergarten, but we do have a 5-day rotating specialist schedule. So each of our students starting in kindergarten will have physical education twice a week, Spanish language once, music once, and art once. So those are our 5-day rotations. We're really, again, blessed to have some amazing educators teaching these classes, and it tends to be a real highlight of our students' day. And we decided again on physical education twice a week, knowing how important that movement is for students' learning. Now, another thing we offer at Schumann Elementary School, if there are areas, academic areas, or otherwise, where your students need extra help, we certainly can provide that, whether that's academic support or support in social emotional areas. We provide reading intervention if there are students that need some acceleration in that area. We have social worker and a school psychologist for support. And of course, we have our special education services, including speech therapy. It is really our job to know your child and to work closely with you to determine when and if these supports are needed. And I encourage you to ask us questions about those things. Never hesitate to have a conversation with us about the possibility of looking at those services if they may be in need. One of the other things that we do that sits outside of our specialist schedule that I mentioned to you before, that I think is fairly unique in Orono, is that we use a thinking skills curriculum for all of our students. Our Orono Challenge teacher, and this is what maybe historically would have been called gifted and talented, pushes into all of our classrooms, starting in kindergarten, and teaches these thinking skills lessons. A lot of the research around gifted education tells us that it is not responsible to begin identifying students as gifted and talented until about 2nd grade, age 8. And we feel that all students can really benefit from this curriculum. So we provide it to all students. The focus really is on cultivating these critical thinking and creative thinking skills, something, of course, that we want all students to have. And it does help teachers begin looking for some of those gifted and talented indicators outside of academic performance for the later years. I mentioned Spanish. It's just important to highlight that. So students do have Spanish once a week as part of their specialist schedule. Now, of course, with once a week, we're not looking at fluency necessarily, but we know that there are cognitive connections that transfer to other areas when students are exposed to a different language. Of course, there are also benefits to having all of our students learning that one language in our primary grades. Certainly enhances cultural understanding that accompanies that language and encourages second language development in later years. There are options through community education if you did want to supplement that language. Twice a week before school, we have a Spanish language class, and twice a week before school, we have Chinese Mandarin. So if you wanted more language than that once a week, we do have those options through community ed. Talking about technology, so we are one-to-one with iPads, K2. That means that every student does have their own iPad in the classroom. We are really mindful of screen time. We know, especially over the past couple of years, you could argue that kids have had a little too much screen time. So we really want to make sure that we're using it in our classroom in responsible ways. And in ways that enhance our learning and don't necessarily replace the things that we know are already effective. So the primary ways that we use our iPads in kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade, are through digital portfolio work. So we use an app called Seesaw, where students will record their learning. They'll take pictures of their writing. They might read a book and record themselves reading. And those are the things that get posted to Seesaw and then are accessible by parents. It's a great way for you to have sort of a window into the classroom and for students to be making decisions about what work they share and what quality work looks like. And then we do use the iPads for some of our assessments. And sometimes we access digital texts through our iPads. It's a really easy and quick way to expand your classroom library if you maybe don't have a book that fits the interest level or reading level or genre that you're looking for a student. We can sometimes access those digitally. We do prefer to have real books and hold real books and read real books, but if there's a specific need for a student, that's another way that we can use our iPads as well. We know that science, technology, engineering, and math is important, and we certainly place an emphasis on that at Schumann Elementary. We have an amazing environmental or learning center or nature center that sits down by kind of by the football and soccer fields. I encourage you, if you haven't been there, to go walk around. This is something that we try to use as much as possible, and we in fact hire a professional naturalist to come several times a year to work with each class on science and nature related lessons down in our nature center. We do have an idea lab, we call it, which has some standalone engineering and coding and electronics type activities that teachers check out, or we have parent volunteers or our paras work with students with. We do have computer science education. We do, I forgot to mention this with the iPads, but we do code as early as kindergarten, coding programs and activities. Hour of Code was actually this week and something that some of our teachers at Schumann participate in. And then something specific to kindergarten that we've done over the past few years is an engineering day in the spring where we have an outside organization come in, parents come in, and we set up engineering activities for the students and parents to engage in together. It's been a real highlight of the kindergarten year. One of the things I think we're most proud of at Schumann Elementary and in Orono in general is our character education program. Sometimes I would hesitate, frankly, to call it a program. It's really, we've been doing it for so long, and I think we do it so well that it's really more of just become embedded in our culture. I think we know that in Orono, you're going to get outstanding academics, but you're also going to get character education. We think it's important to cultivate good people as well, and people that are able to navigate the world in a successful and responsible way when they leave Orono. So we have our pillars of character. You'll see them all over the school. You'll see them all over the district. They're in stone in the activity center, if you've seen them there. And those are, of course, trustworthiness, respect, responsibility, fairness, caring, and citizenship, really universal ideals that we feel we all can agree on, and things that we really try to focus on embedding in our curriculum when appropriate. And the way that we do that, of course, in our younger grades, we understand that we are have to be more of the explicit teachers of those things. So we're using that consistent language and talking about the pillars when praising and redirecting students. We're weaving our character education when we can into academic content. Service learning is a focus of ours too. We do service learning projects every year, and we have our Recess Rockstars program that we've had historically and hope to bring back here soon, where we have parent volunteers out on the playground every day. And their job is strictly to identify positive behaviors that align with our pillars of character and praise students. And we think that's a great program and a great way for parents to be involved. As we go further up in the grade levels into middle school and high school, you really start to see the pillars of character and our character education come out in more service learning opportunities, our unified program, really more concrete ways that are exciting as students get closer, get older and get closer to graduating and going into the having to navigate the real world. We have a wonderful community education program that offers many, many things for our students. If you need before and after school care, we do have a program called Spartan Kids. Spartan Kids is housed in our intermediate school, which is connected to Schumann Elementary School. So it's an easy transition to the beginning of the school day. I would recommend that you reach out to Community Ed if you have any interest or need in before or after school care, and they can give you the details about that and when sign up for that happens. Generally, that happens sometime, I think, midsummer for the upcoming school year, and it's something that you really have to be signing up for quickly in order to get a spot. There are many, many, many enrichment and classes and academic support classes that happen before and after school. I mentioned the language classes that happen before school. We have engineering classes, taekwondo, chess, really anything that you can imagine for kids to do before and after school. And then I also encourage you to look at the summer program leading into your kindergarten year. That brochure will come out, I think, in late spring. And there are, as you see on the slide here, 300 plus camps and classes. And it's a great way when entering kindergarten for your child to get familiar with the facilities, for your child to start meeting some friends, and just to frankly have a lot of fun. So let's talk just briefly about how do you prepare your child for kindergarten in these next 266 days. What can you do? I can tell you that it's pretty simple. And I don't want you to stress out about it. And as I mentioned to you before, we're going to take care of them when they get here. But if you wanted to do some things, I think one of the most important things is really just to practice literacy. We tell people just to read with your kids and choose different genres of reading. I think we tend to focus on fiction or narrative stories, but I think it's important to expose kids to nonfiction and poetry. It's also really important when you're reading with kids to discuss what you read. So ask them questions about what they thought, what did they notice, predict what might happen next. Why did some of those inferential things that I spoke to before, why did the character make that choice? I think it's also important to practice letter names and sounds and rhyming words and identify letters. Can you see any letters on signs as you're walking around or driving in the car? Just some of those simple beginning literacy activities can be really helpful in preparing our students for kindergarten. In terms of writing, really, again, just simple things. Practice having your child practice writing their name, modeling it for them, practicing or writing other letters that they see around them or that they know are in your name or their siblings' names. And if they're ready to start writing words and sentences. Reinforcing those oral language skills are really important as you get nearer to kindergarten. And I want to encourage you to have two-way conversations with your children. I think we're all guilty as parents of probably having more one-way than two-way conversations with our children, but really asking your child questions about their day, their interests, their opinions, and having those two-way conversations and prompting them to ask you questions about what they're curious about. So what are your next steps? The next steps for you at this point, in terms of registering for kindergarten, would be to complete the address verification form. This was sent to you by mail. If you don't have one or if you've lost it, you can certainly contact the district office to receive another one. Non-residents, if you're planning on open enrolling, you must submit all of your paperwork by the state deadline, which is January 15th. So that's coming up pretty quickly. And then we usually start notifying parents of that decision beginning in mid-February. It's a pretty simple, I think it's just a couple sheets. It's pretty simple in terms of the paperwork. But again, January 15th will be the deadline for that. And if you have questions about that, about address verification forms, about kindergarten enrollment, open enrollment, the person to contact would be Marcia Zajac, and you can reach her at enrollment@orono.k12.mn.us. You can also call me if you'd like, call the district office. Happy to answer any questions that you may have. So that is the bulk of the presentation. I know that Lisa was going to come back on and read to me some of the questions that you had that you may have typed in while I was speaking. And I don't know that we'll have time for all of those questions. If there are questions that we can't answer, I'll see if we can reach out to you individually to answer those questions as well. But let's see if we can answer some of those right now. Lisa.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Lamparske. Really appreciate all the wonderful information. We do have some terrific questions from our families participating today. Early in the webinar, you mentioned that we meet students where they are in their learning when they enter kindergarten. Can you explain a little bit about how a student is evaluated or assessed so we have a feeling where they are?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So I would say that we do that in a host of ways, both formal and informal, meaning that we do have a battery of early learning assessments that we give to students right when they come in, letter names, letter sounds, sight words. We do an informal reading inventory. There are some math assessments as well that we do with kids just to get an understanding of where they are in terms of their performance and understanding and level in terms for reading and math. And then frankly, that informal assessment is happening every day with teachers. So teachers are working so closely with students that they're monitoring their learning every day. So we have a series of formal assessments that happen periodically and are certainly more heavily weighted at the beginning of the year when we first meet your students. We get information from preschools too. If your child comes from the Discovery Center, it's helpful to get information from them that can sort of give us a head start. So we have those formal assessments that happen periodically throughout the year. But frankly, I think the most valuable assessments are when teachers are working in small groups and one-on-one with your children, analyzing their work for each day, and then using that information to tailor what happens with them the next day, the next week, the next month.
Terrific, thank you. We have a couple questions about enrollment size. So if you could share how many kindergarten classes we have, the total number of kindergartners in this particular year.
So don't get scared when I tell you this, people usually do. So we have 9 kindergarten classes, and that sounds big because it is big, but it's important to remember that in Orono, if you're a kindergartner, this is the only school that you go to. So if you compare it to maybe a neighboring district like Wayzata, they have, which is a great school district, of course, but they have probably 4 or 5 kindergarten sections at each school, but of course then 10 elementary schools. So we have all 9 of them in our K through 2 school. And as I mentioned before, class sizes within the individual classes are, I would say, anywhere from about 19 to 22 on any given year, which tend to be lower than our neighboring districts. And then as far as the number of kids total, then you're looking at right around 190. 190, between 180 and 200. And what's neat about that is that those are the kids that will be moving together, since we're the only school and we just have one school at each level, our Schumann Elementary, intermediate school, middle school, and high school. That group of 180 to 200 students will be the kids moving together up through the grade levels and eventually graduating together. We're never combining schools at the middle school or high school level. So that's about where we are right now. I couldn't give you the exact number. I want to say we're at 192 today, kindergartners, but it could be off by a couple.
Great, thank you. So given the classroom discussion you just had, how many assistants or helpers does each teacher have?
Yeah, so we have a whole legion of paraprofessionals, and so that rotate throughout the kindergarten classrooms during the day. And the level of support really is based on need. And what we found is with, frankly, the talent of our teachers, the structures that we have set up, and our small class sizes, that we, the extra support from our paraprofessionals, that we don't need a lot of it. So half an hour a day or so, there are paraprofessionals. Right now, most of our kindergarten teachers have about an hour of paraprofessional support, and we feel like that's sufficient. There are a couple that have a little bit more than that, and we have some flexible times. Of course, we have other people that come in to support our classrooms too, our special ed teachers or ELL teachers or reading interventionists or coaches will push in to do extra support as well. We really base the classroom support on need of individual students or that class as a whole. And so it is flexible, but in general, there's about an hour of paraprofessional support a day in kindergarten. And those paraprofessionals are generally meeting with individuals or small groups and doing some reinforcement activities based on the academic content that the teachers have introduced. And then again, some of our more specialized educators in terms of, again, special education, ELL services, that sort of thing that might push in to support specific students or groups of students.
Great, thank you. Maybe you could describe a little bit about the years of experience that our teachers have and maybe how they work together too as a grade level.
Sure. So it's the years of experience really varies. I can tell you that we have very little turnover here. The turnover at Schumann happens generally just because of life events, retirements, or moving across country, or choosing to stay home with their children. And so that's generally where that turnover comes from. But I would say that we have a wide range of experience, and anywhere from people that are in, close to 30 years to maybe 2 or 3 years of experience. I think the good news is that I think the talent of the teachers at Schumann and in Orono in general is really unmatched. People really want to teach here. So when we have an open position, we have, frankly, an unbelievable amount of candidates that apply for those positions. So we're able to choose the best of the best. And I think that that's really what matters in a school. If you were, I would argue it's the most important thing is teacher quality, what teachers are doing in the classroom. And I think that I would, I guess, request that if you know people who already go here, ask them about their teacher. And my guess is that they would just rave about who they are and how much they care about their child and what they're able to do with them academically. But I think it's frankly the best thing about Schumann Elementary School is our teachers. But in terms of years of experience, it really varies.
Great, thank you. We have a question about iPads. What portion of the day can you define a child would be spending on an iPad?
Great question. Well, I would say that, as I mentioned before, we really try to be mindful of screen time. We would prefer that students be doing other things if it can be done, if it doesn't need to be done on an iPad. I would say it's fairly minimal. I don't know that I could put a minute time on it. There is some flexibility and some choice from teachers. This year in particular, given that I think there was more technology use last year than in any year previously, just by need, we've sort of taken a step back and have really looked at minimizing that iPad use if possible. So I don't know, I would hesitate to put an amount of time on it. What I would say is that within our workshop model for reading, there's generally maybe one 15-minute rotation where students might be looking at a digital text or using their seesaw. And there might be another segment a day about the same period of time. But it would really depend on the teacher. And what I would encourage you to do is to have that conversation with your kindergarten teacher as well, and let them know what you think about it, what you think would be valuable. And they'll be, when the teachers communicate their schedule to you, that should be clearly articulated as well. And that's something, again, that's really flexible. But I guess the main point I'd want to make is that we really want to be mindful of screen time. We have conversations about it all the time, frankly. And we want to make sure that iPad is not replacing books. It's not replacing writing with a pencil. It's not replacing those things that we know are really important for kids to be doing in school and in kindergarten in particular.
Thank you, Adam. A couple more questions. I'll just group these together. How are students assigned to classes? Are they grouped with other students at similar levels? And then we have another question about ELL support for a child whose first language is not English. And maybe you could talk a little bit about those two.
Sure. So grouping students is we try to make it a really thoughtful process. And so there are probably, I think when I counted last, close to 20 factors that we can take into consideration with grouping students. Now in kindergarten, it's a little more complicated because we generally don't have as much information about those students coming in, given that we haven't had them in the past. And so it tends to be, for lack of a better term, a little more random. We do take a look at the information that we have. You will have an opportunity to fill out some paperwork that gives us information about your child that we look at really carefully in terms of what sort of learner they are, what sort of teacher they might need, some peers that you know that maybe they if we could group with them that you would prefer, or if it may be on the other side, if you would prefer, if you've got a neighbor that they play with already too much and you'd prefer that they're not with that person, we take that into consideration as well. When we move to first and second grade and have a lot more information about the students, we're able to use that information to, again, thoughtfully place students in our 9 sections. And we do look at academic performance, having both a broad spectrum of students, but also making sure that they have a like peer group so that there are some opportunities for small group instruction with students that are performing at similar levels. We look at things like ELL support, and that if we know we need to have our ELL support pushing into the classroom, that we might group some of our students in that program together, similar to special ed. So we look at what supports they need. We look at academic performance. We look at behavioral considerations. We look at parent preference. So there are a lot of different factors. And I think it's really important to do that. It's if you look at my desk in the summer, it just contains student names and class lists, and we're constantly moving those around based on the information that we have. And we, again, look for teacher feedback as well. So it's really thoughtful. I don't know well, I do know that other schools do it in that way. Some schools find a random approach to be better. I certainly know that would be quicker, but I think it's really important to make those thoughtful class decisions. We can't always predict what a new dynamic will be, but I think that we can optimize every student's learning by really making those decisions based on evidence and data. And then to speak to ELL services, we have ELL services those services are relevant and apply to and are for students who speak any language other than English, regardless of what that language is. And we've had students that right now and historically that have spoken a multitude of languages. And that support looks like a mixture of pull-out support for students, as well as push into the classroom support. So it's a combination of those two, and it's really regardless of native language. And of course, we have resources that can help support students that we can rely on depending on what language it is, either for instructional considerations for students in the classroom or parent contact and support as well.
Great. Just have a couple more questions. We'll keep an eye on the 1 o'clock hour here. Sure. As far as assigning children to classrooms, in the past, you've often kept new students or incoming students with the kindergarten teachers that their older siblings had. Is that a consideration?
It is a consideration. I think when we talk about community and wanting to create that community culture and feeling, we found that has been a really helpful thing and something that parents want. I think that when families come in and they already know the teacher and they've had a good experience with them, and likewise when teachers know that family and probably know that younger sibling from interacting with them at conferences and things like that, it has been helpful. Of course, it's not so sort of as a rule, we like to do that. That is something, of course, that if you, of course, because all kids are different, and if either because of your experience in kindergarten or because of what you know about your child who is entering kindergarten, if that's something that you don't want, I would encourage you just to let me know. And we certainly don't have to do that. We can place them with a different teacher. But we found that most times families really appreciate that and the fact that we do that, and that it's really helpful, again, just in terms of jumpstarting the academics, but also culture and relationship. It's really been important.
I have a question too around enrollment. So with open enrollment, do you know the typical ratio of resident to open enrollment in your building?
Yeah, I think typically it would be about, it's a lot. We have a large open enrollment population compared to most districts. So typically, I think it's been somewhere between 25 and 35% of our kindergartners each year are open enrolled from other districts. And so a lot of times people who open enroll ask, I know this wasn't part of the question, but I thought relevant to it. They'll ask, well, do we, is there any difference, or do we feel as much, do you ever hear open enrollment families feeling like they're not as much a part of the community or the school? And I would say that I have never heard that. I've heard that concern expressed many times upon enrollment, but I think that people find out really quickly that we're a close-knit community, that and a community where the school is really the gathering place and the center point. And so really that we haven't seen a difference in terms of people's feeling of belonging, whether they're a resident or open enrolled. And again, probably a lot of that has to do with the sheer large number of open enrollment families that we do have. And we're happy, and we just think that's frankly such an asset to our school as well.
Thank you, Adam. One final question here, and then I'll just do some closing comments. Is it helpful for kids to have their own personal iPad at home as well?
Well, I don't know that it is helpful from a learning standpoint as it relates to what we do at Schumann. If there are academic pieces that we think students need to do on their iPads, then there have been times where we've sent those home with students in order to do that. But I don't think, and I think that would depend on your family's philosophy around screen time, but we're never going to have anything that would require you to use an iPad, or I can't think of anything right now that would require you to use that iPad at home. And so I guess I would leave that up to families. I'm sure there are reinforcement activities that, teachers have expressed might be helpful if parents wanted to use them outside of school, but it's nothing, barring another, of course, there have been moments in the last couple of years where we relied on our devices for academic content, but barring we don't have a situation where we're in distance learning, that wouldn't be a requirement, no.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mr. Lamparske, for handling all those questions on the fly.
Very welcome.
Appreciate
My
it.
pleasure. My pleasure.
I just wanted to remind everyone that a link to the recorded presentation will be arriving by email later on today, or if not tomorrow. You can certainly rewatch the presentation or share it maybe with a family member that wasn't able to attend today. You can also have your kids meet Ms. Flesher and Mr. Lamparske if they'd like through the Zoom recording. Any questions that you have about enrollment, again, as you see on your screen, those should go to Marcia Zajac, enrollment at Orono K-12 MNUS. We answer questions really quickly regarding enrollment, and we look forward to seeing those address verification forms for residents, and then of course the state open enrollment form for our open enrolled families who'd like to be considered. We hope that you've enjoyed the presentation today. We will, in fact, I do have one other question for you, Mr. Lamparske. If we have any kind of events coming up, spring, summer, to welcome our incoming kindergarten class.
Well, I certainly hope so. There's nothing officially on the calendar yet. I think we are still trying to navigate our current situation and figure out if typically I would say we have a kindergarten orientation in February, and then we have a couple events later in the spring in April where we invite students to come in, take a bus ride, take a tour of the school, and have parents sit in on some presentations. We're hoping to make that happen, but I think a lot of that is going to be dependent upon just some of the current practices and regulations that we're dealing with right now. So stay tuned. We hope to do that. Of course, if you ever want an opportunity to come to the school and see it, I'm happy to give people tours as well. If that's something that you're looking for, you can reach out to the main office at Schumann, Melinda, who's my secretary, And I'd be happy, generally we try to schedule those before or after school, but we can be flexible with that as well. But happy to meet you, show you around, answer some of the questions that you have that are specific to your child or your family.
Great. And I'll include Melinda's email address in that follow-up email that I just mentioned. So again, I want to thank all of you for registering and participating today, and also for the very thoughtful questions. Mr. Lamparske, appreciate your time. And we look forward to seeing you in the coming months. I'll end the webinar and thank you again.